بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سورة Al-Maa'idah, ayah number 100. قال الله تعالى: قل لا يستوي الخبيث والطيب ولو أعجبك كثرة الخبيث فاتقوا الله يا أولي الباب لعلكم تفلحون. So he gives the order to the Prophet: قل, say to everyone that the khabith, meaning the haram or impure things, are not equal to the tayyib, the goodly things, even if the khabith is much. So what does the khabith and the tayyib refer to? It refers to all things. It can refer to people. The tayyib is the Muslim. The khabith is the kafir. Are the Muslim and kuffar equal? The answer is no. The Muslimun are superior in the eyes of Allah Jalla wa Ala than the kuffar. The kuffar incidentally have made themselves inferior by rejecting the deen. We can talk about foodstuffs. Is pork equal to chicken? The answer is no. One is halal, the other one is haram. Even if you have much pork and maybe it tastes delicious, still the little amount of chicken that you have is better than the whole bucket full of pork. You can have wealth. Is a little amount of halal wealth that you earn better than a whole plethora of haram wealth? The answer is that even if the halal wealth is small in number, it is still better than much haram wealth. So the matter is not about the quantity, it is about quality of the halal and haram. Quality, of course, as defined by Allah Jalla wa Ala. He defines to us what is khabith and what is tayyib. And the way that the tayyib would be better than the khabith, even if it is of a smaller amount, is that Allah Jalla wa Ala puts blessing in the tayyib, whereas He would not put blessing in the khabith. As we read before, يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَى وَيُرْبِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. Allah will destroy riba and will give an increase in charity. And then He ends by giving us the famous order of فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ, have taqwa of Allah, Ya, O, Uli meaning ashab, Al-Bab meaning intelligence, لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, so that you may be successful. So the la'alla is for ta'leel, justification, as in to say that taqwa is the sabab or is the cause for you to be successful, both in this life and even more so in the hereafter. Okay, let us reflect on ayah number 100. We take that what matters is that which is halal and wholesome and righteous, not that which is larger in quantity. 1 pound of halal earning will take you further than 100 pounds of haram earning, because one is blessed and the other one is cursed. It's the same thing with actions and people. They are, of course, not equal. The deen of Islam is not a deen of equality. Most of the time, Allah Jalla wa Ala talks about people or things not being equal, such as in this ayah. However, in some cases, the majority may be the option to take. For example, if we have a fiqhi position and there are two opposing viewpoints, supposing that both of viewpoints are equally supported with evidence, then you got to pick a viewpoint. How would you do that? One option is to go with the majority opinion, because all else being equal, they are more likely to be correct. So we're basing this on probability. It's the same thing with people in a chain of narration. A person is graded da'if by one scholar and thiqah or trustworthy by another scholar. So which one do we take then? Do we accept the hadith or not? In a difference of opinion like this, where both sides are equally well argued, we may want to opt for the majority. So in these types of Islamic cases, the majority may well be the option that you want to take. Otherwise, the majority is not always correct. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَإِن تُطِعْ أَكْثَرَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ يُضِلُّكَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. If you were to obey most of the people, they would mislead you from the path of Allah, because most people are misguided with regards to the matters of the deen. We are not here talking about matters of the dunya. We also take from this ayah that it is possible for you to be happy or pleased with something which you ought not to be happy with. Notice how he says, even if much of the khabith pleases you. The verb is أعجب يعجب إعجابا, to please someone. So you need to be aware of these things. Not everything that looks good or pleases you is actually in your interest. Always refer it to the Quran and the authentic Sunnah. We also notice from this ayah how Allah Jalla wa Ala links taqwa to ulul albab. And the reason ought to be obvious. It is only the people of sound intellect who will have the taqwa of Allah Jalla wa Ala. As for people with no sound intellect, they will not have taqwa of Allah Jalla wa Ala, even if they score 150 in their IQ test. Because the intellect is the aqlul irshad, the intellect which guides you to the correct and proper actions. Not the aqlul idrak, the intellect which allows you to comprehend matters. You can have a person with a 150 IQ, yet they are getting drunk on alcohol. That is entirely possible, indeed it does happen. So you see, even with this high IQ, they are doing something which is misguided, because they do not have the aql al-irshad. We also take that it is only with the taqwa of Allah that you will be successful. And this is in opposition to what people think, having high-powered job and money and car and materialistic gains, this is what will make you successful. No, taqwa of Allah Jalla wa Ala is that which makes you successful. Ayah number 101. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu la tas'alu an ashya'a in tubda lakum tasu'kum wa in tas'alu anha hina yunazzalu al-Qur'anu tubda lakum afa Allahu anha wallahu ghafurun halimun. So in this ayah, Allah Jalla wa Ala calls out to the believers and He says to them, do not ask about those matters which, if made plain to you, in tubda lakum, from abda yubdi ibda'an, to make clear or to make plain, to make something come out in the open, tasu'kum, they would trouble you. From sa'a yasu'u, saw'an, to trouble someone or make them ill at ease. He says, if you ask about matters when the Quran is being sent down to you, then they will be made plain to you. He says, afa Allahu anha, Allah has forgiven or looked over that meaning the actual mas'ala that is in your mind. In other words, it is halal until otherwise proven to be haram, and that Allah is the Ghafoor and Halim. So the questions that this ayah is referring to are those questions which Allah Jalla wa Ala has not sent down a ruling for, and then you ask about them, and then the answer comes back that this particular matter is haram. So now what has happened is that you've made life more restrictive for yourself and for others as well. Because before your questioning, this matter was halal, and after your questioning, the answer comes back that this matter is haram. And there are also other examples. For example, a person asking the Prophet, who is my father? And the Prophet says, your father is such and such a person, other than the man who is known to be his father. So if your father is person A, and then you ask the Prophet, who is my father? And the Prophet says, your father is person B. So now you realize that this person A, whom you thought was your father, is not actually your father. So this would be a humiliation upon you and upon your mother also. Or for example, a person asking the Prophet, where is my father? And then the Prophet replies, your father is in Jahannam. Of course that is going to cause you trouble and distress. So keep quiet about those things that the Sharia keeps quiet about. This is what the companions are ordered to do. However, now that the Sharia has been completed, all matters have been made plain, it's not like the Sharia is still in its development stage as it was amongst the Sahaba. One may argue that asking questions about which you do not have the ruling is perfectly permissible, because it is not like the Sharia can become any more restrictive. Now that was the case during the time of the Sahaba, because the Sharia was being developed day by day, stage by stage. Now this is no longer the case. But even if we adopt this opinion, we would say that you should only ask about practical matters. If you want to seek a fatwa, ask about matters which actually apply to you or are likely to apply to you. Do not ask about these hyper-theoretical matters which are not likely to happen. This is from the useless questioning. So ask about practical matters in accordance with Allah's command, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. He says that you may ask about these matters when the Quran is sending a revelation about a particular matter. So if the Quran sends a revelation down and you do not fully understand what it means, then you may ask for clarification about that particular matter. That is not a problem, because here you're not bringing up a new mas'ala. Rather, you're asking about an existing mas'ala, an existing issue that the Quran is currently speaking about. And that is a different matter altogether. When he says they will be made plain to you, it means that the Prophet will clarify the Quran to you, as in to say, give you the tafsir. Okay, let us reflect on ayah number 101. We take that the matter was fairly strict for the Sahaba in the beginning, in that they were not allowed to ask about masail for fear that the answer may come back and it would restrict your life further, or it could cause you grievance. And we gave some examples of that earlier. Of course, nowadays we said that the wahi has stopped, so it is impossible for anything now to become haram which was previously halal. That is not possible. Naskh is not possible now. So because of that, you can ask questions about all affairs, but we did say that your questions must be realistic as opposed to hyper-theoretical. For example, if the moon got smashed with a large meteorite, then how would we mark the beginning of Ramadan and all other months? This is a hyper-theoretical question, not likely to take place. So seeking a fatwa about these matters is futile. We take that it is entirely possible that Allah legislates something in the deen which puts you ill at ease, because the ayah says تَسُؤْكُمْ, it will cause you trouble. Now of course there are certain aspects of the deen that you dislike, but this is you disliking them from your nature. As for if you dislike them from the point of view that they are legislations in the deen, meaning to say you are unhappy with what Allah has decreed, then if you are unhappy with what Allah has decreed, either shar'an or kawnan, then in fact you are unhappy with Allah as your Rabb, and that is kufr, and completely flies in the face of Islam. Islam, of course, meaning to surrender. So for example, fighting in the way of Allah may be hated to many people because they hate being inconvenienced like this and putting their lives on the line. Now if this is a natural hatred for being inconvenienced, then that is fine. Humans do not like to be inconvenienced. That's absolutely fine. But if your hatred is on account of the fact that you do not wish for this to be the hukum shar'i, meaning you feel that this hukum shar'i is not correct, and you hate it on that count, then it means you are unhappy with the decree and the hukum of Allah, which in turn means you are unhappy with Allah as your Rabb, because it's like you're saying that Allah got this one wrong and I know better. And you find many people like this, of course. Any ruling which comes their way and they do not like it as a hukum of Allah, they will try to reinterpret it and try to modernize it. We also find that the Prophet explains the Quran to his people, so he would give them the tafsir. The Quran also explains other parts of the Quran and clarifies the matter. We find this often. For example, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْيَتَامَى قُلْ إِصْلَاحٌ لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ. They ask you about the orphans, say rectifying their affairs is better. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْمَحِيضِ قُلْ هُوَ أَذًى. They ask you about the menstrual cycle, say it is a harmful thing. He says, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ مَاذَا يُنْفِقُونَ قُلِ الْعَفْوَ. They ask you what should they spend, tell them you should spend the excess of your wealth. He says, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. They ask you about the intoxicants and the gambling. Say to them that there is benefit in them, but there is a great sin. But we also have clarifications on the Quran from the Hadith as well, such as in response to the ayah لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا الْحُسْنَى وَزِيَادَةً. Those who do good will receive good and an excess or an increase. The Prophet explained that this ziyada, this increase, is looking at the face of Allah Jalla wa Ala. And there are other examples besides. we also find that what Allah keeps quiet about is permissible. As He says, عَفَى اللَّهُ عَنْهَا. We also take the two names of Allah, Ghafoor and Halim, along with the attributes. Ayah number 102. قَدْ سَأَلَهَا قَوْمٌ مِّن قَبْلِكُمْ ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا بِهَا كَافِرِينَ. He says, before you, a people, a qawm, asked such questions. Then on account of that, they became kafirin. They rejected the truth. So in this ayah, He's telling us, do not take the example and do not follow the mistakes of those before you. They asked certain questions, the answer came down, and they rejected it and became kuffar thereby, because the answer was too much for them to bear. So the solution is, do not ask about these matters in the first place. Meaning to say, do not take on unnecessary burden that you will not be able to bear. So some Mufassirin have given examples of this. For example, Qawm of Salih alayhi salam asking for the female camel, the Naqa, and when they were given what they asked for, guess what? They killed it and were punished. Would have been better not to ask for such a thing in the first place. Also, the people of Musa alayhi salam who asked Musa to show us Allah out in view, and they were punished for such a question. The people of Isa alayhi salam asking for a dinner table to be sent down. We are due to discuss that in this surah later on. And when it came down, those who still refused to accept Isa alayhi salam were punished. It would have been better not to ask for such things. Also, the example of the Baqarah in Surah Al-Baqarah, when they kept asking for the description of the cow. Even though in the end they did obey, just about, they were almost about to not obey. But the point is, they were asking about these matters which they should not be asking about. In other words, they are burdening on themselves extra burden which they do not need. Because the more you ask about the cow, the more restrictive this cow will become, and therefore it will become harder to find such a cow with these extra descriptions. So it would be obvious then not to ask about these extra descriptions and just go ahead and sacrifice a cow. Any cow would do. So reflecting on ayah number 102, we take that we ought to learn lessons from the mistakes of the previous nations. And this is what the Quran focuses much on, telling about the previous nations so we do not fall into their same mistakes. And this is from the nasiha that Allah Jalla wa Ala has for us. We can also take a general lesson not to burden yourself unnecessarily and live a life which is simple and as free of burdens as possible. Practicing this deen is a burden enough. You do not need to burden yourself with any more. And asking questions, certainly during the time of the companions, would be putting on yourself extra burden. But like we say, it does not have to be in the context of asking questions. It could be in all sorts of contexts. For example, working 2 jobs to gain extra money when you do not need it. It is just extra burden, and this never ends well. هذا والله أعلم.